Dr. Fuller, what is the single biggest thing that public schools need to do to prepare their students for the 21st century to make them competitive?
I think the single biggest thing that needs to happen is public schools need to open up the system to innovation, new ideas, new ways to proceed in making sure that all children learn. And that conceptually we need to move away from the notion of a school system to a system of learning opportunities. And I think that if public schools can begin to pursue that type of strategy in a rigorous way, that we will redefine public schooling in America and reinvigorate public schooling, which is very important to all of us.
And if that means an absolute dog-eat-dog fight against the status quo, it needs to be done?
Oh, absolutely. You cannot maintain the status quo and make changes deep enough and fast enough to deal with the needs that our kids have today.
All right, we'll talk about that in the next 20 minutes or so with Dr. Howard Fuller. He is a man who sort of led the movement in Wisconsin, which was the first state in the union to be able to start a school choice movement program. It's been there for about 6 years or so. He makes his home now in Milwaukee, and he is the professor at Marquette University of Education. He also is director of the Institute for Transformation of Learning, a mouthful, and he's our guest today on Spotlight. Joining me in studio to help question our guests, a man who has been spending so much time on the golf course trying to beat Tiger Woods. He hasn't managed to get in here this year, but we've got him now. And Tim Richard, political writer and columnist with the Observer and Eccentric newspaper chain. I'm Chuck Stokes, and this is Spotlight on the News. We're back in the WXYZ Spotlight studio today. Our guest, Dr. Howard Fuller. For 4 years, he was superintendent of the Milwaukee school system, which I believe is the 15th largest school system in the nation. He is now professor of education at Marquette University and was one of the pioneers of the school choice movement program in America. We'll talk to him a little bit about that and what role it may or may not have here in the state of Michigan. And picking up our questioning, Tim Richard of the Observer and Eccentric.
Dr. Fuller, Michigan and Wisconsin have traveled parallel paths, and Michigan's Governor John Engler has concentrated on developing charter schools for the skilled trades. You were talking about innovation a moment ago. Do you like that general concept of skilled trade charter schools?
Well, you know, I would say from what I know about Michigan that the governor has really concentrated on developing the concept of charter schools generally. And then one aspect of charter schools are the notion of skilled trades. I don't have a problem with skilled trades as long as we make sure that all of the kids have a rigorous foundation that will allow them to make changes later on. I think that the danger to our efforts to have school of work, school of career, those types of activities, if what we're going to do is to put kids in very narrow tracks when we know that given the nature of technology, given the nature of change that we're experiencing in this world, that people may change jobs 6, 7, 8 times in their lifetime. So whatever it is we do today, in my view, it ought to give kids the foundation that they will need to make changes later on in their life.
During your visit to Detroit, you met with the Council of Baptist Pastors, a politically powerful group in Detroit of clergymen. They visited with you in Milwaukee to talk about school choice. Do you think that school choice Detroit is right for school choice?
You know, I think that depends. I'm not one of the people who run around the country going from community to community telling people this is what they ought to do. I think the reality is that the people in Detroit have to determine what is the best strategy that they can use to make sure that all of the children in Detroit are educated, and in particularly poor kids. And so from my view, choice is a very important lever in a myriad of strategies that need to occur so that that can happen. What I think people in Detroit ought to do is to look at what we've done in Milwaukee, look at Cleveland, look at other places, and then based on the reality that people face in Detroit, to make the decision, does this make sense for them? If it does, in what way should it be the same, in what way should it be different? So I guess my response is it could be a very good strategy for people in Detroit, but that's really for this community to determine.
The reality is that Detroit schools are dysfunctional. There is a entrenched bureaucracy that refuses to even consider change. Right. Could choice be a liberating factor for parents?
Yes, I think so. I mean, if it is used in conjunction with a number of other strategies. See, to me, the choice issue is really an issue of power. And in America today, choice is not really the issue because people with money are already making choices. The issue is how do we ensure that poor people can begin to make some of those choices for their children. In my view, the way you influence policy in America is you influence the allocation of resources. A critical resource in a school district, and I know this as a superintendent, is where does the money go and who determines where the money goes. And what I'm simply saying is we need to put poor people in that equation. And so to that extent, whether it's Detroit, Milwaukee, Cleveland, or wherever it is, I think that that is a useful instrument for poor parents to have at their disposal.
Let me follow up on that very quickly. In Wisconsin, where you have schools of choice, who pays for transporting the students? Is it their responsibility, or does the public pay for school buses to go to schools of choice?
Well, you know, for a long time in Milwaukee and in Wisconsin, public dollars have been used to transport kids to private schools. I mean, that is not a new phenomenon in Milwaukee. And I really think that the way it currently exists is categorical dollars are used to pay for transportation. And in fact, the way the choice program is now, the transportation is actually provided through the Milwaukee Public Schools. And so there's that type of relationship for transportation in choice schools.
Dr. Fuller, let's step back for a moment if we can, because there are a lot of viewers out there that may not know what we mean when we say schools of choice. Right. And if experience has taught me anything, it is that to different people, schools of choice mean different things. What does it mean to Howard Fuller when you talk about this, as was your experience in Milwaukee and perhaps should be the experience in other major urban school districts?
You know, I think that's an excellent question because there is what people call public school choice, which is really, you have an existing public school system like Milwaukee, where when the integration thing came up, they used magnet schools as like the way to, quote, promote voluntary integration, so that in theory, people have choice. In reality, they have choice. When I did my dissertation, I called it forced choice, because what happened is that if you're living in a community where there's 1,800 kids living in an attendance area, you got one school in that attendance area, you say to people, you can choose to go to your neighborhood school, but in reality, about 1,800 people or 1,200 people will be bussed out. So in a sense, you have choice, but it's forced choice that's dictated by the realities of where schools are and what is the integration plan. So there's that aspect of what people normally call public school choice. The choice that we're talking about is a choice where you give vouchers to low-income parents, and they can use those vouchers to go to any school that they choose to go to as long as it is non-sectarian.
All right, you would not, and make sure that we're clear, support using vouchers for parochial schools?
I would, but the law, what happened is that in Wisconsin, the effort was made to expand the existing charter, the existing choice program that you talked about, to include sectarian and religious schools. The ACLU and the teachers union went to court on that issue. A judge, it went up to the Supreme Court. There was a 3-3 split on its constitutionality. It came back to a judge in Madison, Wisconsin, who ruled that it was unconstitutional. That is being appealed. So the case is on its way back either to the state Supreme Court, which is more likely, or possibly it might go right into federal court.
And during this, excuse me 1 second, and during this interim though, conversely speaking, test scores have gone up. Is that correct?
Correct. There have been 3 studies. Now when you say test scores, you mean for the choice, the kids participating in the choice programs. There have been 3 research studies. The first one was done by John Whitty from the Lafayette School of Public Policy. He was the only one who had access to the information for 5 years. John's study showed that people were very happy, but that there was mixed academic success. 2 professors, one from Harvard, one from the University of Houston, did a study using the same data but a different control group, came to the conclusion that there was significant improvement in math and in reading, which were the 2 areas that were tested. A 3rd researcher, Dr. Cecilia Rouse from Princeton University, did research, came up with a tougher control group. Her data showed that there was very strong improvement in math. She didn't find the same level of improvement in reading, but the composite score she felt was significant.
All right, we have to take a commercial break. We'll hurry back. I have a few more questions about that. I also cut off Bill Johnson of Detroit News, and we'll get right back with more questions and answers. Stay with us. Our topic, school choice and education, and Bill Johnson of the Detroit News picks up our question.
The Cleveland experience was somewhat different when it came to school vouchers. The Ohio legislature gave the city of Cleveland the ability not only for parents to take a voucher to a private school, but to a religious school as well. And some 1,900 parents took advantage of that. Is that kind of voucher program preferable to the one that you experienced in Wisconsin?
Yeah, it's preferable for me because, I mean, I want to see parents have all of the options available. And for me, it's not so much ideological as much as it is pragmatic, because what I'm really after is not just having some nice choice schools or nice charter schools. I want to improve the entire system. I think in order to improve the entire system, we need to affect the existing system. And I think the way that you affect it is by having kids leave, and when the kids leave, they take the money with them. I think you create a much different synergism for change. So why I want this in Wisconsin is because without the religious schools, I don't think we can get to the critical mass of students that we need. with them, we could get to a much larger number. We would have space right now for about 8,000 kids. And with the way that the program was designed, the expansion, we could have gone to 15,000 kids.
Of course, the argument against vouchers is that it will mean the end of public education as we know it. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'm not so sure we want to keep public education as we know it. We want to keep public education. But I think what we need to do is to reinvent public education. And I think it would be good for public education to have some competitive pressures that would serve to open up the system to innovation. And so from my standpoint, that would be a good thing. I felt that as a superintendent.
A lot of critics of school choice and charter schools and the voucher programs would say that one of the potential dangers is that with so many of these being up under religious institutions, that there are institutions that may abuse this relationship with young students, and in the process of just not educating them, they're also trying to convert them to a particular type of religion. How do you guard against this type of thing happening, especially when you see some of these different type of cults and other situations going on?
Well, first of all, let's look at what has happened in the charter school movement. To date, we've not had any school for witches or any other cult schools. And if you look at cults, clearly cults develop without the need of schools. But what I would argue is that you don't make public policy based on the least common denominator. That is, this might happen, therefore we got to not allow something good to happen because something bad over here may occur. What we do is we do the right thing, and then if something bad happens, we deal with that when it occurs, and we would have the capacity to do it. So what I'm saying is that we have to develop the program in such a way that it meets what our interests are, and then we have to be on guard for anyone who tries to abuse that. Because I would say that you have abuses, if I can use that term, in the existing system when it comes to what it is that's happening to kids. And you don't say, well, let's close down the entire system because they're abuses. What people do is they say, here's an abuse, here's how we're going to deal with that problem. And I would say the same thing about choice.
Let me follow up. Michigan's charter school law is unusual compared to most other states in that we allow private schools to incorporate as charter schools and get state money. Would you comment on that situation, on existing private schools becoming charter schools?
Yeah, that's possible also in Wisconsin. I mean, I think as long as when those schools convert, they have to meet whatever the criteria is set up, I have no problems with that. And I think that that's a very innovative idea. It's a very good idea. And, you know, I just wish that other states would adopt that model.
What do you consider to be the most salient, beneficial factor of vouchers as it relates to public education?
Is that it gives poor parents an option to exercise power that could impact the education of their children. It creates an environment where everyone has to begin to take seriously the needs and the interests of poor parents, just as they do in other areas where they take seriously the needs and interests of kids who are not poor.
Might it also cause public schools to compete for students, which could benefit students in the long run?
Well, I think, see, that's what I meant by saying you need to create a synergism of change so that everyone begins to understand that no longer can you sit here and whether kids learn or not, you're going to get paid. We're going to keep putting kids in a school that has never worked for kids and their families. All of a sudden, you've got to have a situation where if you don't begin to make changes that meets the needs of these kids, they may choose to go somewhere else. And the important thing to remember about a choice program is a choice program will only work if people choose it. If people are happy with where they are, what's the worry? You only need to worry when you know that you're not meeting the needs and interests of parents and the kids, and they may therefore choose other options.
Dr. Fuller, in January, Michigan released its MEAP, which is Michigan Educational Assessment scores, and the charter schools as a group scored very well below the standard public schools in math and reading, and particularly in math. Do you want to comment on that? Do you know about that situation?
I don't know about it, but one of the things I do know is that around the country, you're having mixed results at this point with charter schools. And I'm not using this as an excuse because I think ultimately charter schools are going to have to stand the test of time. And for me, standing the test of time means you have to improve academic achievement. One of the things that's occurring is contrary to the popular wisdom, the people who are going into charter schools and going into other options are not, quote, the cream of the crop. In fact, they are people who are doing least well inside of the system. And in fact, some charter schools are out picking up kids who formerly were no longer in school. And so there are people who would argue that given the length of time that charter schools have been open, given the problems that kids are bringing into the system, that we need to give them 3 to 4 years to see what kind of improvements, if any, they could make, and that to judge them on the first couple of years would not be fair.
So you don't see the public schools as becoming a dumping ground for the poorer students if charter schools proliferate?
I don't see that, because I mean, I would ask the question, first of all, what is it that the current system looks like? I mean, who is it that the current system is serving? In Milwaukee, we were serving a population where 75 to 80% of the kids qualified for free and reduced lunch. We were serving a population where in 1996, if you look at the class of 1996, you go back and look at 1992, something like 3,804 African American kids started out in the 9th grade. In 1996, 1,084 of those kids graduated. That's a 28% graduation rate. So what I'm saying is, given that situation, I'm not worried about charter schools being, quote, taking the best students and leaving the so-called worst students in the public system. If we're smart and we do this correctly, and we all begin to make changes, we will make changes that will benefit all of these students.
All right, I have to interrupt you one more time, take another commercial break. We haven't talked about unions and what role they may play. We'll try to tackle that when we come right back with Howard Fuller. We'll be right back. Dr. Fuller, we haven't really talked directly about unions, but you can bet that there are people out there right now that's saying, I'm hearing all this stuff from Dr. Fuller. Obviously, he probably does not support unions. Just for clarification, what do you think about educational unions?
I think that there's a reason why we have unions in America. Anyone who understands the history of education knows that the conditions that unions develop to address. I think the issue that unions have to face is, if you were progressive at one point in history, does that necessarily make you progressive today? I would argue that many unions are no longer progressive in terms of the needs and interests of kids, that what they have come to the point where they spend their time dealing with the needs and interests of their membership.
So you're not anti-union, but you are saying unions need to change with the times.
But unions are going to have to change
in
order to deal with the realities that we're currently facing.
They are part of the problem.
Oh, absolutely, as are other kinds of organized interests inside of large school systems.
I'd like to go back to Cleveland and Milwaukee. In both instances, the legislature gave the authority, or at least assigned vouchers to the lowest income kids.
Right.
And that means that you basically had the most socially, economically, and spiritually impoverished kids taking advantage of this program. That almost guaranteed failure, doesn't it?
No, because what we have to understand is that these kids are being educated in this country. And so what I'm hoping is that by people being willing to take these children, that we will in fact establish once and for all that all of our children can in fact be educated, and that we will have the freedom and the flexibility to use proven methods that will work to ensure that these kids learn. That is the challenge. And on the one hand, while I think it may mean that in the first cut, test scores may not be what you know, where you want them to be, that's the reason why we want to have these programs, because we want the kids who need it the most to have the opportunity to have something different develop to meet their needs and their interests.
One sentence answer, Dr. Fuller. Which one area of the curriculum, math, reading, science, civics, is most in need of reform as a general rule?
I would say math, reading, science, civics.
That's what you get for answering that kind of question.
That's fine.
Dr. Howard Fuller, we appreciate you being with us.
Thanks for having me.
And good luck. And next time you come back to Michigan, we hope that you stop in and give us some of your pearls of wisdom in regards to education.
Well, thanks for inviting me.
It's a pleasure having you. Bill, always a pleasure having you. And you ready to take on Tiger Woods yet?
Give me a couple of years.
All right, a couple of years. All right, and add a 0 after that too. Tim, always a pleasure having you. And we want to thank all of you at home for joining us. We'll be back next week with more Newsmakers in the Spotlight. From all of us here at WXYZ, I'm Chuck Stokes. Have a good week.
If you have questions or comments regarding this program, please write to Spotlight on the News at this address, or send us a message on your computer to wxyz@rust.net.